Welcome to Justice Reloaded HD, where we celebrate the quiet power of everyday kindness. Not every act of goodness is done to be seen. And not everyone who watches us will speak up right away. But sometimes it's the quietest moments, the unnoticed gestures, that end up changing everything. Today's story begins with a simple act, a waitress who found a lost wallet belonging to an elderly woman. She could have ignored it. She could have left it for someone else to handle. But instead, she chose something rare, something beautiful. She chose to care. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire time, and that person was about to change her life forever. If you believe that kindness never goes unnoticed by the universe, even when no one applauds it, leave a like to help spread that light. And don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD for more heartfelt stories that remind us what truly matters. Liana Foster wasn't always a waitress. Just a few years ago, she wore pressed slacks and answered phones at a bustling office downtown. She kept spreadsheets neat, invoices on time, and her life more or less predictable. But then the pandemic swept through Milwaukee like a quiet storm, taking her job, her health insurance, and eventually, the small apartment she once shared with her daughter Harper. There were no dramatic breakdowns, no desperate Facebook posts, no pleas for help. Liana didn't believe in making her struggles someone else's burden. She believed in waking up, getting dressed, and doing what needed to be done, no matter how hard, no matter how tired she felt. By the time the unemployment check stopped coming, she was already clocking 2 part-time jobs, washing dishes in the morning and bussing tables at night. Eventually, she landed a steady evening shift at Sunset Grill, a no-frills diner tucked between a gas station and an old laundromat, where regulars ordered meatloaf by name and coffee flowed like water. The job didn't pay much, but it was honest. She wore her name tag with quiet pride and treated every customer, drunk, kind, rude, or lonely, with the same calm respect. She'd memorize their orders without needing a notepad, refill their water before they asked, and never let her smile waver, even when her shoes were soaked through from the snow, or when she knew Harper was at home alone with boxed mac and cheese again. To most people, Liana seemed like just another server. But those who paid attention noticed the little things. Like how she always wrapped up leftovers extra tight for the elderly. How she kept extra straws in her apron for the kids. How she once paid for a homeless man's coffee without blinking, using her last $5 bill, then quietly skipped dinner that night. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She wasn't looking for a thank you. She just couldn't walk past a person in need and pretend not to see them. At home, she was a different kind of strong. Every night, she helped Harper with homework, even if she barely remembered the math herself. They played card games on the floor, made popcorn dinners, and built forts out of laundry baskets. On Sunday mornings, when the diner opened late, they danced barefoot in the kitchen to whatever music was on the radio. Liana didn't have much to give, but whatever she had, she gave with her whole heart. There were nights when the weight of it all would press down, when she'd stare at the cracked ceiling in her one-bedroom rental and wonder how much longer she could hold everything together. But then Harper would mumble something in her sleep, or roll over and hold her hand, and that would be enough. She believed in small things, a hot meal, a kind word, a moment of rest. And though the world never seemed to give her a break, she never let it harden her. Liana Foster walked through life like someone carrying invisible bruises, but also carrying light. Not the kind that blinds or boasts. The kind that simply glows, soft, steady, and warm. And that's who she was on the night this story began. It was the kind of night that pressed cold into your bones. Wet sidewalks shimmering under streetlights, wind slipping through the cracks in the diner's old windows. Inside Sunset Grill, the warmth buzzed with clinks of silverware, murmurs of conversation, and the low hum of a jukebox stuck between decades. Friday nights were always like this, brisk, crowded, and oddly comforting. That's when she came in. An elderly woman, bundled in a faded gray coat too big for her frame, shuffled through the door with a careful grace. Her steps were slow but sure, her gloved hands clutching a worn leather purse. She must have been close to 80, maybe more. No one seemed to notice her arrival, except Liana. From across the room, Liana offered a smile and guided her to a booth near the window. "Take your time, ma'am," she said gently, handing over a menu. The woman nodded, removing a small, laminated senior discount card from her purse. She ordered the cheapest item on the menu, a grilled cheese sandwich with a side of applesauce, and a cup of hot water with lemon. She sat quietly, not eating right away. Just watching. Her eyes wandered from couple to couple, table to table, as though collecting moments, like souvenirs. Liana checked on her periodically. Not in a rushed, performative way, but with a kind of care that noticed when someone hadn't touched their food or when their hands trembled slightly lifting a teacup. The woman thanked her in a soft, almost embarrassed whisper. When her meal was done, she folded the napkin precisely, placed it next to her plate, and slipped out quietly while no one was looking. It was about 20 minutes later when Liana saw it. A brown leather wallet, tucked in the crevice between the seat cushion and the wall. Not flashy. Not new. Just ordinary and a little tired, like its owner. She glanced toward the door, but the woman was long gone. No one seemed to notice. Liana picked it up and opened it carefully. Inside, a few dollars in small bills, a library card, 2 grocery coupons, and a creased photo of a young man in uniform. The ID said Margaret and Halberd, 842 Lansing Street. Liana recognized the address. It wasn't far. She could have turned it in to the manager. That was protocol. They'd lock it up and wait for someone to come claim it, maybe days later. Or they might have tossed it in the lost and found drawer, forgotten among umbrellas and old receipts. But something tugged at Liana's heart. Maybe it was the way Margaret had stared at the room, like she hadn't been among people in a long time. Maybe it was the worn edges of the photograph. Maybe it was just the kind of person Liana was. She walked to the kitchen, took off her apron, and asked her manager if she could clock out 15 minutes early. "I've got something important to return," she said. And she meant it. Outside, the wind had picked up. She pulled her coat tighter and walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, holding the wallet close to her chest. The ride wasn't long, 10 minutes maybe, but the entire way, her thoughts were filled with questions. Would Margaret be scared, realizing her wallet was missing? Was she alone at home? Did she have someone to call? Would she even remember where she lost it? Liana stepped off the bus and walked down a quiet residential street. The houses were old but cared for, each porch light glowing faintly through the mist. She reached 842 Lansing and hesitated just a moment before knocking. What she didn't know was that behind her decision, not to hand the wallet off, not to shrug and go home, someone else had been watching all along. Someone who saw not just the action, but the heart behind it. But that part of the story would come later. For now it was just a waitress, standing on a stranger's porch in the cold, returning something that wasn't hers, because it was the right thing to do. The porch light flickered as Liana stood there, the wallet still clutched tightly in her hand. A worn welcome mat sat beneath her feet, its faded lettering nearly unreadable. The small house looked old but lived in. Flower pots lined the railing, even though winter had long since taken the blooms. A ceramic cat statue watched her from a windowsill. She hesitated for only a second, then knocked. It took a while. She heard shuffling from inside, slow, uneven steps, like someone careful not to trip. The door opened just a crack, held by a security chain. A voice called out, cautious but soft. "Yes." Liana took a half step forward, holding up the wallet. "Hi. I believe this might be yours, ma'am. Are you Margaret Halberd?" The chain slid back, and the door opened fully. Margaret stood in her slippers, her eyes wide behind thick glasses. She looked smaller than she had at the diner, more fragile, like the night had worn her down. A gray cat wound its way around her ankles. Liana offered the wallet with both hands, like returning something sacred. "I found it at Sunset Grill," she explained. "You must have dropped it after dinner." Margaret didn't reach for it right away. Instead, She placed a hand over her mouth. "Oh dear," she breathed. "I didn't even realize. I was just looking for it. I was about to call the police, or the bank." Her voice cracked, then vanished altogether. Liana stepped gently inside, just to the threshold. "It's all here. I didn't touch anything. I just wanted to make sure you got it back before you lost sleep over it." That's when the tears came. Not loud or messy, but quiet and sudden, streaming down Margaret's cheeks as she took the wallet into trembling hands. The cat meowed and padded silently away, sensing the shift in the room. Margaret opened the wallet slowly, as though to confirm this wasn't a dream. When she saw the photograph of the young man, folded in its usual place, she closed her eyes and nodded to herself. "It's not about the money," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's never been about the money." "I know," Liana replied. There was a silence between them, gentle, not awkward. The kind that didn't demand to be filled. "I'm sorry I made you come all this way," Margaret said finally, brushing her eyes with her sleeve. Liana shook her head. "Don't be. It was important." Margaret looked at her again, this time really seeing her. She noticed the tired eyes, the frayed cuffs on her coat, the damp hem of her jeans. A question seemed to rise to her lips, maybe about why Liana hadn't just turned the wallet in, or why she looked so worn for someone so young, but she didn't ask it. Instead, she stepped aside. "Would you like to come in for a moment? I've got tea. Or cocoa. It's not much, but—" Liana smiled, warm but firm. "Thank you, but I should get home. My daughter's waiting." Margaret's eyes softened even more. "You're a good person," she said. Liana shook her head again, almost embarrassed. "No, just someone who knows what it's like to worry over little things." She turned to leave, then paused. "I just wanted to make sure you didn't have to stay up all night over a lost wallet." Then she was gone, walking back into the cold, the porch light casting a golden glow behind her. Margaret stood there for a moment, holding the wallet close to her chest. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She looked down at her cat, now curled up on the rug. "Well," she whispered, as if to herself, "maybe the world's not as lonely as I thought." And upstairs, in a drawer she hadn't opened in years, she would later place that wallet, untouched, unchanged, as a reminder that some strangers still chose to care, even when they had every reason not to. At a table in the far corner of Sunset Grill, near the window streaked with condensation, sat a man no one really noticed. He wore a brown canvas jacket, the kind you'd find at a hardware store, and a navy beanie pulled snug over graying hair. He stirred his coffee slowly, eyes trailing along the room, not in suspicion or boredom, but with quiet, thoughtful attention. His name was Elijah Ward. Most people in Milwaukee wouldn't recognize him even if he were standing right in front of them. A decade earlier, Forbes had listed him as one of the youngest rising tech entrepreneurs in the Midwest. But Elijah had long since disappeared from the headlines. He'd sold his company, erased his digital footprint, and poured his fortune into a foundation few had ever heard of, Quiet Kindness. He didn't believe in plaques, press conferences, or donor dinners. He believed in watching, in listening, in acting when no one expected it. That night, Elijah had simply wanted a place to think. The diner wasn't glamorous, but it was real, greasy menus, chipped mugs, and familiar rhythms. He liked that. It reminded him of his mother's kitchen before she passed. He was halfway through a slice of apple pie when the elderly woman entered. Something about her tugged at him, the way her hands shook, how carefully she counted out the coins, the look in her eyes as she sat alone, absorbing the energy of people around her like she was hungry for more than just food. Elijah didn't approach. He didn't offer to pay. He just watched. And then came the waitress. She wasn't flashy. No makeup, no performative friendliness. But she moved with intention, present, aware. She treated the old woman with a quiet dignity, The kind that didn't feel like pity, but respect. He saw her glance at the worn purse, how she lingered a second longer by the table, how she brought the woman extra napkins without being asked. Later, after the woman had gone, Elijah saw the moment everything shifted. The waitress, Liana, her name tag read, spotted the wallet. Her brows pinched together, just slightly. She looked around. Not dramatically, just enough to check if anyone nearby might have seen it fall. Then she picked it up gently, like it was something delicate. Valuable, not because of what was inside, but because of who had owned it. She stood there for a long moment. Elijah could see the decision playing out on her face. He recognized that look. It was the weight of 100 hard days crashing into a single second of choice. Turn it in? Pretend she never saw it? Or something else? And then she did something most people wouldn't. She walked to the back, spoke briefly to the manager, took off her apron, and disappeared into the cold with the wallet tucked under her arm. Elijah didn't follow. He didn't stop her. He didn't even ask her name. But he remembered. Every motion. Every glance. Every pause. Because in a world that so often celebrated the loud, the big, the showy, he had just witnessed something rare, a kindness that expected nothing. A decision made not for reward or recognition, but because it was right. He scribbled a note on a napkin, something simple to anchor the moment in his memory, then folded it and slipped it into his coat pocket. He paid his bill, left a generous tip for the night staff, and exited the diner like any other customer. But Elijah Ward had not come into that diner by accident. And he would not forget the woman who chose to care when no one was watching. 2 days later, as snow dusted the sidewalks outside Sunset Grill, Liana was midway through her shift, balancing 2 coffee pots and a mental to-do list, when her manager called her over to the counter. "This just came for you," he said, handing her a thick envelope. Courier delivered it. No return address. Liana wiped her hands on her apron before taking it. Her name was written in careful cursive on the front. No last name. Just Liana. She turned it over. Sealed with wax. Unmarked otherwise. Curious but cautious, she tucked it in her apron and finished the breakfast rush. It wasn't until her 10-minute break, sitting alone at the staff table in the back, that she finally opened it. Inside were 2 things. The first was a folded letter, written by hand on thick cream-colored stationery. The second was a check, real, printed, and dated, for $500,000. Her hands trembled as she read the letter. "I saw what you did. How you handled a situation most people would have overlooked. No one asked you to do the right thing, but you did it anyway. Please use this to lighten your load. And if you can, keep spreading the kind of kindness this world desperately needs. E. Ward." Her breath caught in her chest. She read it again, slower this time, as if the ink might disappear if she blinked too hard. $500,000. She turned the check over, as if expecting some trick, some catch, a punchline that would make it all make sense. But it was real. Every part of it. Her name. The signature. The bank. She felt the back of her throat tighten, eyes burning with disbelief. She wasn't someone who cried easily. Life had toughened her too much for that. But now, alone in a small break room with faded posters on the wall and the hum of a vending machine behind her, she couldn't stop the tears. Not because of the money, but because someone had seen her. All her life, Liana had done the right thing quietly, when no one clapped, when no one cared, when doing the right thing cost her time, comfort, or energy she didn't have. And now, someone had noticed. Someone had believed in her enough to give her a way out. A chance. She thought of Harper. Of the overdue rent notice on the kitchen table. The winter coat with the broken zipper. The overdue dentist bill. The groceries she'd skipped last week just to make gas money stretch. But then her thoughts shifted. She thought of Margaret. Of the way her voice shook when she realized someone had cared enough to return what she lost. Of the elderly man who came in every Tuesday morning and left half his meal untouched. Of the teenage dishwasher who was saving tips to help his mom. That night, Liana didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table long after Harper had gone to bed, the envelope beside her, the letter smoothed flat. In front of her, a blank notepad. She drew 2 columns. On the left, things I need. On the right, things other people need. She didn't rush. She didn't dramatize. She just wrote. Rent. Harper's coat. Time. Books for the library. A safe place for kids after school. Someone to believe in them. The list grew, slow and honest. She didn't have a plan yet. But she knew one thing with certainty. This money wasn't just about her. It was a seed. And she intended to plant it somewhere it could grow. 1 month later, on a sunny but brisk Saturday morning, the front door of a newly painted corner building swung open for the very first time. Above it hung a hand-carved wooden sign that read, "The Lost and Found." The lettering was simple, elegant, and unmistakably warm, like the place itself. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and old books. Mismatched chairs filled the space, each one donated, sanded down, repainted with care. There were low shelves stocked with gently used novels, coloring books, and worn classics with curled pages. A large bay window spilled sunlight across a reading nook made of throw pillows and patchwork quilts. In the back, a small espresso bar gleamed beneath hand-lettered chalkboard menus, offering coffee, cocoa, and tea at pay-what-you-can prices. And near the front door, mounted on the wall just above a repurposed coat rack, was a wooden plaque that read, "Not everyone sees you when you do the right thing. But sometimes someone does, and life smiles back." It was the heart of the space. A quiet promise. A reason this place existed at all. Liana stood behind the counter, apron tied at her waist, holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. She handed one to Harper, now proudly sporting a junior librarian badge made out of cardboard and glitter glue. The little girl took it with both hands and looked around with wide, excited eyes. "Do you think people will come, Mom?" she asked. "They already have," Liana whispered, nodding toward the door. Outside, a small line had formed. A teenage boy with a guitar slung across his back. A young mother holding her daughter's hand. An elderly couple holding matching canvas tote bags. A man in a wheelchair wearing a veteran's cap. A group of school children holding art supplies. They came not because of flashy ads or grand openings. They came because someone had told someone who had told someone else. Word had spread, not about a bookstore or a cafe, but about a place where people were seen, remembered, valued. At the Lost and Found, you didn't need money to sit and stay. You didn't need a receipt to reclaim what you left behind, whether it was a scarf, a book, or just a part of yourself. There was a give one, take one shelf by the window, and a lost and found box that welcomed forgotten mittens, journals, and stories. There were art classes every Wednesday for kids, run by a retired teacher who had offered to volunteer. There were reading circles, quiet hours, and evenings when local musicians played for tips in a jar. The place didn't solve all problems. It didn't erase every hardship. But it opened a door, one built on the belief that kindness could be its own kind of foundation. Every time Liana looked around, she saw more than just walls and shelves. She saw the choices that had led here. The tired waitress who had once walked 2 miles in the snow to return a stranger's wallet. The letter that had arrived in silence. The check she could have spent on herself, but instead used to build something for others. And every time someone smiled as they walked in, shaking off the cold, setting down their burdens, she knew she'd chosen right. One afternoon, Margaret came in. She moved slowly but confidently, her coat buttoned to the neck. She paused when she saw the plaque. Read the words carefully. Then turned and met Liana's eyes. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. Later that day, as the sun dipped low and golden light poured across the floorboards, Liana sat by the window with a mug of tea and Harper curled up beside her. She watched a young boy return a comic book to the shelf and carefully straighten its spine. She watched an older woman set down a scarf in the lost and found basket with a note that read, "In case someone else needs one." And for the first time in a long time, she didn't worry about what came next. Because the door was open. And kindness was walking in. Sometimes, it's the smallest acts that echo the loudest. Liana Foster didn't change the world with a grand gesture. She didn't go viral. She didn't make headlines. She simply found a lost wallet, and chose to return it without expecting anything in return. In that quiet choice, she reminded us of something this world forgets too easily. Kindness matters, even when no one is watching. Many of us have lived long enough to know that life is full of moments where doing the right thing doesn't always bring reward. It's easier to walk away, to say not my problem, or to hope someone else will step in. But what if, just what if, someone was silently hoping we wouldn't? This story reminds us that goodness never really disappears. It plants seeds. It inspires others. And sometimes without our knowledge, it's witnessed by someone who has the power to change everything, not just for us but through us. Liana could have used that money for herself, and no one would have blamed her. But she chose to build something that gave back. The Lost and Found became more than a cafe or bookstore. It became a haven, a living testament to the idea that when we care for others, we help mend what's broken in ourselves too. So the next time you face a small choice, whether to help, to notice, to care, remember, the person you become in those quiet moments might just be the beginning of someone else's miracle. If you believe that a small act, like returning a stranger's wallet, can change the course of someone's life, leave a like to help spread that simple but powerful kindness. And if stories like this touch your heart, real, human, and full of hope, don't forget to subscribe to Justice Reloaded HD. Thank you for staying with us until the end. We'll see you in the next story.